Title: My neighbor kept leaving at 3:17 a.m. every night. I finally followed him. Story: for almost 3 months, my neighbor left his house at exactly 3:17 in the morning. Not approximately 3:17. Not around 3. Exactly 3:17. I know because the first few times it happened, he woke me up. My bedroom window faces the street, and his driveway is directly across from mine. His headlights would suddenly flash through my curtains, and then I'd hear the quiet rumble of his old pickup truck starting. I'd look at the clock. 3:17 a.m. Every single time. At first, I didn't care. People work night shifts. People have weird schedules. Maybe he was taking care of someone. Maybe he couldn't sleep. Then I started noticing something else. He never came back with the truck. At least, not immediately. I'd wake up around 7 or 8, and his truck would be sitting in his driveway. Which meant he'd apparently driven somewhere, parked, walked back, and somehow returned home without me noticing. It didn't make sense. My neighbor, whose name I eventually learned was Daniel, wasn't someone I knew particularly well. He moved into the house about 6 months before this started. Early 40s, quiet, divorced, no kids that I knew of. He wasn't unfriendly. Just distant. If we happened to get our mail at the same time, he'd give me a quick nod. Morning. Morning. That was pretty much the extent of our relationship. But then his behavior started getting stranger. Every night at 3:17. Truck starts. Headlights on. He drives away. And by sunrise, the truck is back. One night, I happened to still be awake. It was 3:12 a.m. I was sitting on my couch watching some terrible documentary when I noticed the light across the street come on. Daniel's front door opened. He walked outside wearing a dark jacket. He stood beside his truck for several seconds. Then he looked up and down the street. That was the part that bothered me. He wasn't checking for traffic. He was checking for people. He looked directly toward my house. I immediately turned off my TV. I don't know why. Maybe because I suddenly felt like I was doing something wrong by watching him. He got into his truck. 3:17, the headlights came on. And he drove away. I watched until his taillights disappeared around the corner. Then I went to bed. The next morning, I found something weird in my mailbox. There was a folded piece of paper inside. No name. No envelope. Just a piece of notebook paper folded in half. I opened it. There were 4 words written on it. Stop watching my house. I just stood there. My first thought was that Daniel had left it. My second thought was that I had somehow made myself look like a complete psychopath. I hadn't been intentionally spying on him. But I had been looking out the window almost every night. And apparently he'd noticed. I threw the paper away. For the next week, I stopped watching him. I even stopped looking at the clock around 3:17. I figured whatever he was doing was none of my business. Then one Saturday afternoon, I was taking out the trash when I saw Daniel standing in his garage. The garage door was halfway open. He was staring at something on a workbench. I couldn't see what it was. He noticed me. Our eyes met. He immediately pulled the garage door down. That should have been the end of it. Except later that evening, I heard something hit my front porch. I opened the door. There was a small cardboard box sitting outside. Inside was an old cell phone. No charger. No case. Just a cheap, beat-up phone. And taped to it was another piece of paper. This time it said, "If something happens to me, call the last number." I thought it was a joke. I actually laughed. Then I looked at the phone. There was only one contact saved. Moam, I didn't call. I didn't even turn the phone on. I took it back across the street and knocked on Daniel's door. He didn't answer. I knocked again. Nothing. I tried the handle. Locked. I called through the door. Daniel? Silence. Then I heard something inside. A thump. I stepped back. Daniel? Another thump. This time louder. I called 911. The police arrived within minutes. They forced the door open. Daniel was lying on the floor of his living room. He was conscious, but barely. Turns out he'd had a seizure. The ambulance took him to the hospital. And here's where things get strange. Because while the paramedics were working on him, one of the officers pulled me aside. He asked why I had the phone. I explained everything. The 3:17 a.m. trips. The note. The box. The phone. The officer looked at me for a long time. Then he asked, "Did he ever tell you where he goes?" "No, did you ever follow him?" "No," he nodded. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. "Good." I asked him what that meant. He didn't answer. A few hours later, Daniel's sister showed up at my house. I'd never met her before. She was crying. And the first thing she said was, "Thank you for finding him." I told her I hadn't exactly found him. I explained what happened. Then I asked her about the phone. She looked confused. "What phone?" I showed it to her. She went pale. She immediately asked me where I'd gotten it. I told her. She sat down at my kitchen table. And that's when I finally learned what Daniel had been doing at 3:17 every morning. 2 years earlier, Daniel's teenage daughter had died. A drunk driver hit her while she was walking home from a friend's house. The accident happened at 3:17 a.m. Daniel hadn't been driving. He wasn't even there. But after his daughter died, he became obsessed with the idea that he could have prevented it. He started visiting the intersection every night. Not because he believed he could change what happened. He said he went there because it was the only place where the world still felt like it had stopped. His sister told me he'd been doing it for nearly 2 years. Every night. 3:17 a.m. Same intersection. Same routine. He'd park the truck. Sit on the curb. Stay for about 20 minutes. Then walk home. But there was something else. The police had recently reopened the case. Not because they'd discovered who caused the accident. Because they'd discovered something they'd missed. A security camera from a nearby business had recorded the crash. And the footage showed another vehicle stopping nearby immediately afterward. The driver got out. Walked toward the accident. Then left. They'd never identified the person. Daniel had been going there every night because he was convinced that person knew something. He had spent months trying to find them. That's what the notes and paperwork were about. That was why he kept leaving at 3:17. But then his sister told me something I didn't expect. Daniel wasn't actually looking for the driver. He was looking for a witness. Someone who might have seen his daughter during the final moments of her life. I asked her why. She said, he just wants to know if she was scared. That sentence has stayed with me. Because suddenly all those nights I'd been watching him leave didn't seem creepy anymore. They seemed heartbreaking. I asked his sister about the warning he'd left me. The one that said, stop watching my house. She laughed through her tears. Apparently Daniel had noticed me watching from my window. He thought I was going to call the police because he was worried I was suspicious of him. So he left the note. The phone was different. That wasn't supposed to be for me. He had apparently prepared it months earlier in case he ever found the witness. The last number belonged to his sister. He wanted whoever found the phone to call her. I asked her why he'd left it on my porch. She said she didn't know. But then she remembered something. Daniel had told her once that if he ever collapsed during one of his nightly trips, he hoped someone nearby would notice. Apparently he'd become increasingly worried about his health. And that's when I realized something. The night I found him wasn't random. He'd had another seizure the week before. He knew something was wrong. He just hadn't told anyone. Daniel spent 4 days in the hospital. When he finally came home, I saw him standing outside his house. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked embarrassed. I walked across the street. He looked at me. Then he said, "You probably think I'm insane." I told him I didn't. He stared at the ground. Then he said, "I probably would have thought I was too." We stood there in silence. Finally, I asked him something I'd wanted to ask since his sister told me the story. Did they find the witness? Daniel looked at me. No, then he smiled. Not a happy smile. Just a tired one. But they found the car. Apparently the vehicle in the security footage had been identified. The owner had moved away years earlier. Police were still trying to locate him. Daniel didn't know whether the man had actually witnessed the accident. But for the first time in 2 years, there was a possibility that he might finally get an answer. I didn't know what to say. So I said the only thing that came to mind. I hope you get it. Daniel nodded. Me too. That was it. I went back home. He went inside. And I assumed that was where the story ended. It wasn't. About 2 weeks later, I woke up at 3:17 a.m. I don't know what woke me. Maybe a noise. Maybe instinct. I looked through the curtains. Daniel's driveway was empty. His truck was gone. For a second, I thought nothing of it. Then I remembered the last time I'd seen him. He'd told me he wasn't going to the intersection anymore. He said he'd promised his sister. So I got dressed. I drove to the intersection. His truck was parked on the side of the road. The driver's door was open. Daniel was sitting on the curb. I walked toward him. He didn't seem surprised. He just looked at me and said, "I found him." I sat down beside him. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he handed me his phone. There was a photograph on the screen. A man standing beside an old car. Daniel said the man had finally contacted the police. He remembered the accident. He remembered stopping. And he remembered seeing Daniel's daughter. I didn't ask what happened next. I didn't want to know. But Daniel eventually told me. She wasn't alone. I looked at him. He was staring at the road. She was scared, he said. But somebody stayed with her. His voice cracked. He said she kept asking if her dad knew where she was. Daniel covered his face with his hands. And I realized that he'd spent 2 years coming to this exact place because he thought his daughter had died alone. He finally knew she hadn't. We sat there until almost sunrise. When I got up to leave, Daniel stopped me. "Hey." I turned around. "Thanks for watching." I laughed. He laughed too. And that was the first time either of us had laughed around each other. I never asked Daniel what happened after that. I don't know if he still goes to the intersection. I don't know if he ever completely got over losing his daughter. I don't think anyone ever does. But I do know that he stopped leaving at 3:17. And sometimes, late at night, I'll see the light in his kitchen turn on. I'll see him make coffee. And then I'll see him sit by the window. Not staring at the road anymore. Just sitting there. Living. And honestly, that's probably the best ending I could have hoped for.